Meeks, and I'm doing the program tonight about binocular astronomy. So if we're going to talk about binoculars, let's start with the basics. What exactly are binoculars? Well, binoculars are two of Matt's favorite type of telescope side by side. They're two little tiny refractors, and it uses the lens to shoot a beam that you eventually see in your eye. And as opposed to a reflector, which uses a mirror, your binoculars are going to use glass lenses to produce an image for you. Here's a little bit of background history for you here. I believe this internet article was written by Skynet because I could not find an author to properly cite this. So I do have a link for you, but I don't have the proper citation. I'm sorry. But just a really quick background. Binoculars have been around for quite a while. As you all may know, Galileo in the 17th century decided he would build his own telescope and point it towards the stars. And not too long after he did that, someone else decided, hey, what if we put two of these together and we can use both our eyes at the same time? And so not long after Galileo, we started having binoculars. So what are the perks of having binoculars? Well, for one thing, depth perception. That's the whole point of having your two little tiny telescopes right next to each other. So if you think about it, when you look out into the night sky, you're basically looking towards infinity, right? So how are you going to get a sense of depth perception? Well, the binoculars help with that. So you're able to use both your eyes to do that. And another thing that may or may not be something that helps you is it also produces an erect image, unlike telescopes, unless you've bought a really expensive eyepiece to give you an erect image. The telescope by default is going to give you an upside down and reversed image, and most people aren't going to be concerned with that because in space there is no up and down, because for our tiny perspective we're basically looking into infinity. So if you're going to use binoculars for something other than looking at the stars, you might need to have an erect image to help yourself out. So if you're using them for terrestrial viewing during the daytime, which is another thing that I like about binoculars, is that they're multifunctional. So you can use them during the day to watch birds. I like doing that. I've been doing bird watching since I was in high school, which was a very long time ago. So I would say I was probably using binoculars for bird watching before I started using them for astronomy even. So what are some of the other perks of binoculars? Well, you certainly have portability. Some of your telescopes are bigger than others, so some of them are going to be quite heavy, and depending on what type of vehicle you have to transport a telescope in, sometimes it might not quite be large enough to transport a telescope. But even if you're riding on a bicycle, you can transport a pair of binoculars. So I do like the portability aspect of it. It makes it much more convenient. So much easier to carry something like this around than a large telescope. One of the other perks that can certainly be of interest to someone who may be getting into the astronomy hobby for the first time, or maybe they're a little bit reluctant to go out and spend thousands of dollars. So price point is definitely a perk of binoculars. Even a good set of binoculars, you don't have to spend a whole lot of money on. I mean, you can spend over $1,000 on them, but I certainly have not done that. This smaller pair of Nikon 10x50s that I have, I think I paid about $140 for those. The larger Skymaster Pros I have over there from Celestron are around $300, and I say around $300 because that kind of depends on where you want to buy them from. If you want to buy them direct from Celestron and hope that they take enough care to ship them properly to you, you're going to have to pay a little bit extra. In my case, I actually rolled the dice and bought these from Amazon, so I got them about $30 or $40 cheaper. And luckily they shipped them, and I didn't hear any rattling when I took them out of the box. And you know, when I took them out for first light, I could actually see something. So I was like, okay, great, they're not broken. So in that case, I came out a little bit on top. But to each their own. If you want to order direct from Celestron, if you buy something from them, go for it. And even if you don't want to spend, you know, what I spent on these smaller Nikons, I looked on Amazon yesterday just to see, you know, what's basically the cheapest thing I could find that might be useful in an astronomy setting. And I saw the Tasco brand 7x35 binoculars on there for about $40. So, and I mean, even with those, you can get some good viewing in. You can look up at the night sky and definitely see a lot more than you can see with your naked eye. So, especially for someone who may be getting into the hobby for the first time, that can be really enlightening and inspiring to, you know, kind of delve into something they might not have done before. So, all right. So, I'm giving you a little bit of perks of why I think it's good to have binoculars. I'm not saying I hate telescopes. I definitely don't. I own a telescope, but I do like the portability. So when I go to star parties, I do tend to reach for the binoculars first rather than the telescope, just because of its portability. So let's say that maybe you borrowed someone's binoculars for a little while, or maybe you said, hey, I want to go buy some. What do I need to look for in a pair of binoculars that I might want to buy? Well, here's a couple technical terms I've put up here to kind of help everyone, you know, get an idea of what you might want to look for, depending on, you know, how deep you want to get into the hobby, or maybe, you know, how much money you might want to spend on a pair of binoculars. So let's go first and foremost with the objective lens diameter. So what that is, that's your largest lens at the front of your binoculars. And that number is going to be measured in millimeters. This particular pair are 50 millimeters in diameter. And this particular pair is also 10 times magnification. And when you have, like, each pair of binoculars is going to be a little bit different, unless when you're talking about, like, okay, some have higher magnification than others, some have larger objective lens than others. So one thing you might want to keep in mind, depending on like how you want to use it, like if you only want to use it for astronomy, or maybe you want to use some for terrestrial viewing during the daytime and you want to use them at night, one of the specifications you might want to pay attention to is your exit pupil. So what exactly is an exit pupil? So to get that ratio, that's going to be your objective lens diameter divided by your magnification. So in the case of the smaller pair, these are 10 by 50. So 50 divided by 10, that's 5. So that means that the exit pupil of your binoculars is 5 millimeters. So this beam of light that's coming out to hopefully meet your eyes, it's going to be a diameter of about 5 millimeters. And so you might be wondering, why exactly is that important? So if you were in the business meeting earlier, you know that when they turn the lights out and turn them back on, you were like, oh God, what's happening? Well, your pupils are dilating based on your ambient lighting conditions, right? So the less light you have around you, the more your pupils are going to dilate, so your brain can interpret that image that your eyes you're trying to find for you. So according to what I've read, your pupils are able to dilate between about 3 to 7 millimeters, depending on like how dark it is or how light it is. So during the day, around 3 millimeters. At night, if it's really dark out, maybe up to about 7 millimeters. So that exit pupil is going to kind of give you an idea of the potential that you're going to have to see like what you're looking at. So let's say that your pupils are dilated. Your own pupils are dilated 5 millimeters. And let's say that you've got an exit pupil on these binoculars of 5 millimeters. That means that this beam of light's coming out of your binoculars and it's going into your pupils that are also dilated at 5 millimeters. So you're not really going to get a loss of light there. So if the exit pupil of your binoculars is larger than the diameter that your pupils are currently dilated, you're going to have a little bit of loss in brightness there. So you're not going to be able to see as much light as that's being captured in your binoculars at that given time. And if you take the flip side of that, let's say that your pupils are dilated at 5, or let's say your pupils are dilated at 7 millimeters, and you've got your smaller pair of binoculars that's giving you an exit pupil of 5 millimeters. Well, you might be seeing a little bit dimmer picture than your pupils are currently able to interpret, because that beam that's coming out it's a little bit smaller than what your pupils are able to capture at that given moment. And so that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get a bad image. It just means it might not be quite as efficient given the conditions around you at that given time. So eye relief is another spec that you might see if you're looking at astronomy binoculars, and that's something that people with eyeglasses might want to pay attention to. So the eye relief is going to be the distance between your lens on the back here and that area to where you're going to see the picture. So obviously the longer the eye relief, the better suited you're going to be to still wear your eyeglasses and use that particular pair of binoculars. I believe my larger ones, the eye relief is 15.5 millimeters. And I think that's right about the threshold of being able to still wear eyeglasses without having to take them off and easily see the image through those. So those are just a couple things to look at. And field of view is another one. Your field of view in binoculars are going to be much larger than in a telescope, because a telescope you're going to have magnification of much larger than what these are going to be. These are 10 times, those are 20 times. So the higher the magnification, the lower your field of view is going to be. But even with the larger ones, you're still going to be able to see quite a bit. So it really depends on what type of object you're looking at. Sometimes you might decide, hey, I want to use the smaller pair just because maybe you're wanting to look at two different objects at the same time. So maybe you want to see both of them in the same field of view, and you need that larger field of view. So in that case, you might want to go with the smaller pair of binoculars. And I'll get to that. I'll get here in a couple of slides. I'll show you a picture and a drawing, and I'll kind of explain like how I went with the lower ones first, and then went to the bigger ones for the comet we had a few months ago. So I've already touched on it a little bit, like different sizes that you can get with binoculars. And just a show of hand, like how many people have used binoculars for astronomy before? Okay, quite a few people. So anytime you're talking about a description for binoculars, especially when you're going to be in the context of astronomy, you talk about the description like 10 by 50, 20 by 80, 20 by 100, 25 by 100. What exactly does that mean? Well, the first number is going to be your magnification, and the second number is going to be your objective lens diameter. So just like a telescope, because binoculars are telescopes, two telescopes put together, the larger your objective lens diameter, the more light you're going to be capable of bringing in. So you're going to be able to see fainter objects the larger your objective lens is, but that's also going to come into play, like when I mentioned the exit pupil. So sometimes you might be wasting the size of your binoculars depending on the conditions that you're in at the time. So the larger the binoculars, the fainter the object you're going to be able to see, like in theory. So that when I say fainter, the fainter the object, I'm talking about apparent magnitude. Now, if you read the technical specifications from Celestron or Nikon or whoever, like you're on their website, they're going to say, here's your limiting magnitude. On these larger ones, they say that you can see up to 12th magnitude. That must be like an abortal one. So I personally have never been able to see that in either of my binoculars, no matter how dark of a site that I go to. But I would say that 8th magnitude is certainly possible, even where I live and right outside downtown Chattanooga. So, you know, 8th magnitude, you can see some pretty faint stuff, even in the city lights. It just depends on like where it's at on the horizon, you know, what you're seeing and transparency conditions are too. So I wouldn't get discouraged living in the city, even if you want to pick you up a pair of binoculars to use in the night sky. Like if you don't have a whole lot of time, you don't want to take the telescope out and set it up, take your binoculars out if you've got a pair, and you can still see some pretty good stuff even in the city. And most of your astronomy binoculars are also going to give you your field of view, and I put pictures of my two up here, and luckily they've given us the angular field of view. So in reference to astronomy, you're looking up at the sky. It's not flat, it's spherical, right? So you're going to be more interested in the angular field of view rather than the linear field of view. So my smaller ones, you got 6.5 degrees, and the bigger ones, you've got 3.2 degrees field of view. And the Celestron, they've also given you the linear field of view, which I guess if you wanted to use the bigger ones to do any type of nature observation during the day, maybe the linear field of view is a little more relevant to you. I personally have never really used that number, but some people might, so it's good to have that information available to you if you need it. All right, so let's say you're ready to go. You got your pair of binoculars, and like, all right, what can I see? What are your realistic expectations, or what should your realistic expectations be? I would not recommend looking at the sun. I do not know personally if they make sun shields for binoculars. They do? Okay. I do not own any, and I'm one of those people where I'm like, I'd rather buy or get a solar telescope rather than try and put a filter on something, because I just feel like I'd screw it up. So.
Make solar binoculars.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Binoculars.
Great. Now I'm going to go buy some after that. Thanks, Matt.
I won a pair.
Oh, really? From where?
Yeah.
That's awesome. I might have to look into that eventually. Well, what do I mean by full sky events?
Meteor showers.
Exactly. Meteor showers. So, me personally, I would rather look at the sky with my naked eye, because when you're looking with your naked eye, you've got a whole much bigger field of view to look at if you're looking during a particular meteor shower. Now, I will say I have been looking through my binoculars before at night and seen something go streak right across, and that is kind of fun because I'm really not trying to image anything, so something streaking across the field of view isn't going to ruin the night for me. So it is kind of fun to see a meteor, a random meteor that you hadn't planned on seeing, go through that. But if you're specifically trying to look at a meteor shower, I wouldn't really recommend the binoculars for that. I also wouldn't really recommend them for objects whose angular size is too small. So some of your deep sky objects, they're going to be really tiny from an angular size. So you might get a little discouraged seeing it because it's probably just going to be like a speck of light to you rather than something with any kind of detail. So me personally, I would recommend sticking to things that are a little larger in angular size. And obviously you want something that's brighter too, but I think the angular size is important too. But don't get discouraged. Just because they're not ideal for a few things doesn't mean they're not ideal for several things. So let's talk about some of the things that they are good for. Certainly the planets, because Galileo, when he first built his telescope, it was what, 60 millimeters? So his telescope was actually smaller than what those binoculars are capable of seeing. So, and he looked up in the sky and he discovered what we know as the Galilean moons now, the 4 brightest moons of Jupiter. So even in my Bortle 7 backyard, I can put these tiny ones up in the sky and I can see the 4 Galilean moons very plainly. So there's no question at all seeing those, even in a light polluted sky. Some of the fainter planets like Neptune and Uranus, I have not tried those in the smaller ones, but at Cloudland Canyon a couple star parties ago, I did finally find Neptune with the bigger ones. I've been trying to do that for a long time, and I finally did it. Now, I'm not going to pretend that I saw blue in the field of view, because I didn't. It was just a speck of light. We'll call it gray or maybe white, but I went back and forth to Sky Safari several times trying to see, like, okay, it's supposed to be right here. And I look, okay, that's a star, okay, that's a star. And I'm like, wait a second, that's not a star on here. That has to be it. And I finally was able to connect the dots where they're supposed to go. And I finally found it, but you're not going to be able to see the sphere. Like, I know you image Neptune, right? So you can see a little bit of sphere, a little bit of a disk in the one that you did, but you're not going to be able to do that at at 20 power and 80 millimeters. But you can still see the planet itself, which I think is fun. So some of the other things that you can see, galaxies. Some of the galaxies, from our perspective, are going to have a much larger angular size than others. Even with these small ones here, I can look up and see quite a bit of detail in the Andromeda galaxy. It's going to look a little flatter and fuzzier than if you're looking at it in a telescope, but you can certainly see some detail. And I know when I was first getting into this, I didn't know that I found Andromeda at the time, but I was just scanning the sky, trying to see what I could find. I did that, and I came across it, and I was like, wow, what is that? And I looked it up, and I was like, that's a galaxy. And I wasn't even using a telescope, and I was looking at a galaxy. But what are some of the other things you can see? Star clusters as well. While we're at that, let's go over what the 5 main deep sky objects are and why I think that's important to know those if you're wanting to use a pair of binoculars to do some nighttime astronomy. So 5 main deep sky objects. Galaxies, kind of gave away one of them there. So star clusters, but what kind of star clusters? You have open clusters and you have globular clusters, okay? And you also have nebulae, 2 different types, planetary nebulae and diffuse nebulae. And there's an astronomer from the 18th century, Mr. Messier. He came up with a list of 110 of the brightest objects that he found in the sky from his perspective, where he was viewing them with a telescope. I believe he used 100 millimeter refractor, I think is what he used most of his viewing with. So most of what he found in his 100 millimeter refractor, it's Yeah, you can find most of those with a good pair of binoculars. And that's a list of 110 objects, and all 5 of the main deep sky objects are represented in that list. So one of the things that I've been doing, Ralph, I think you mentioned it a meeting or two ago, were some of the binocular observing programs through the Astronomical League. And I've started on the Messier list myself, and you don't have to view all of them with your binoculars. If you want to go all the way through and complete the observation program, and you can get a certificate and a pin from the Astronomical League if you do that. If you're using binoculars only, that requires 50 observations. So they have on the description on the Astro League's website, and this is another reason why I think binoculars are so neat, because it really doesn't cost a lot of money to get into it if that's something you like, dealing with. So when they started the program with the Astro League, they took a pair of 7x35 Tasco binoculars and found at least 50 objects on the Messier list, which I think is amazing. I'm not going to claim that I'm capable of doing that. I definitely have to use some of the bigger ones for that, but if they can find at least 50 of them with those types of binoculars, then anyone can look at that list, and even if you don't want to look at the entire list, you can still get quite a bit of stuff on that list to have some oohing and ahhing during the nighttime. So that's one of the neat.
I found that comets are worth looking at through binoculars.
Exactly.
Have you ever viewed any comets with
I did. As a matter of fact, on January the 27th, I finally found it in my backyard after lots of painstaking nights of going out there and be like, is that it? Like, I can't tell. It's so dim. And I finally found it. There you go.
That's definitely a comet.
Yes, exactly.
I would guess.
And that's in a Bortle 7 and right outside of downtown Chattanooga. It wasn't that pair of 20x80s. I actually used my Zoomel 20x80s to take that photograph. But I know it doesn't look professional, but I was really excited to not only find it, but to be able to take a photograph of it just to prove to everyone, like, hey, look what I found. So I was happy about that. Here's a picture of my observation log for that one. I don't know if you can read it from all the way in the back. Hopefully you can read it online. But so it was January 27th, and the time it was right after 11 p.m. and I was using the 20x80s here in Chattanooga. And what I talked about earlier when I said sometimes like the smaller binoculars are suited for certain things, and sometimes the larger ones are suited for other things. One thing that I was able to do when I found the comet, I was able to get a star, like a bright star that maybe you've heard of it, Kochab. It's the brightest star in the bowl of the Little Dipper. So it's Beta Ursa Minoris, I think it is how you would say it. So I was able to get that star in the field of view and kind of like find where the comet was. So it was a good way for me to star hop without having to, look at Sky Safari or something like that. So I was really happy that I was able to get both of those in the field of view, because this star is about second magnitude, so it's pretty bright. Like, you can see that even in really light polluted skies. And I was able to resolve the comet even with the smaller ones, and I was like, okay, I know where it's at now, so let's get the bigger ones out and see if I can photograph this.
What magnitude was the comet?
I want to say it was about 6th magnitude at that point. Like, it was pretty dim, and there wasn't much of a tail that I could see on it.
Yeah.
I'll go back to the picture here in just a second, but I'm not quite the artist that some of the others in the club are, Matt. but I did try and draw it out a little bit. So if you look at my picture from before here, so you can see some of the ones in there. Like I tried to jot down a little bit of what I found there, but that's one of the ones I was able to photograph, and I was really happy about that. So yeah, you can definitely see comets with binoculars. And I would like to find some more eventually, but we didn't have a whole lot of options here lately, so that was all I could get at the time there. Here's something else I did with the 20 by 80s. This is the Orion Nebula. So even in the binoculars, you can get quite a bit of detail out of that. I believe that was a 3-second exposure, so I kind of cheated a little bit. That's not exactly what you're going to see in a live view, but you can still see quite a bit of nebulosity even without the 3-second exposure there. So yeah, planets, moons, comets, nebula, the Messier catalog, I would definitely recommend if you're just starting out and you want to get into some binocular astronomy, or even if you're an expert. I don't claim to be an expert. I'm a perpetual student, so you know, even if
I was curious, how did you, as far as the camera, how did you interface that with the binocular?
oh, good question. I should have mentioned that earlier. This is actually done with an iPhone 13 Pro. So, and
You just slap it up against the lens there?
yeah. So, well, I've actually experimented. I didn't bring them tonight. I probably should have, but I've been experimenting with some iPhone mounts. I got one that was kind of cheap, and that's the one I actually used to take that photo. And then I got the whatever the fancy one is that Celestron sells, and I'm trying to figure out how to get that on the mount without it hitting the back end of the mount. That's been kind of a problem for me, so I'm going to have to do some more trial and error on that. But yeah, like didn't have to buy a fancy camera. Like I already had the phone, so I was like, okay, I'm going to just see if I can kind of mount it to my binoculars here, and that's what we got. We got a couple photos out of it.
Cool.
Yeah, so I would like to try and get some more photos of some of the other brighter Messier objects. I'm a particular fan of some of the open clusters, so like Beehive cluster, that'd be a good target. So, because that one's pretty bright. That's what, 4th or 5th magnitude. So, and I can't remember what its angular size is, but I mean, you could pretty much fill up the whole field of view here and see quite a bit of stars in that one.
You know, some of those Messier objects look better in binoculars than they do through a telescope.
Mhm.
I mean, I have to bounce back and forth sometimes.
Yeah, I think it's really great for the clusters, especially if it's, you know, right around late spring and summertime, because you can just go right around the Milky Way and be like, there's a cluster, there's a cluster, there's a cluster, there's a cluster. Like you don't really run out of stuff to look at in your binoculars because it doesn't take very long to scan the sky. You know, it's a lot easier to do it that way. I mean, yeah, you're sacrificing a little bit because you don't have really high magnification, but you can make up for it in, you know, your portability and your ease, if you will.
There's also a double star, binocular double star. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, I bet that's hard.
No.
I'm glad you mentioned that because I actually, without knowing what I was looking at, saw a trinary that I didn't know the name of it, and I had to look it up and figure it out. But it was in the constellation Cygnus, so it's 31 Cygni, I think, is the designation. But it's actually a trinary, and that's a good candidate to look at through binoculars because you've got 3 different colors in it. So you've got like blue, white, and orangish red. And 2 of them are pretty close together, and you can resolve those pretty easily, even in the smaller ones. But and Albiro, that's another good one.
Man, that's bad. It's right there.
So you can definitely resolve that one in the binoculars because those are pretty far apart. But yeah, like Ralph said, the double star program, I can't remember if it's 50 or 100 different ones for the binocular, but Yeah, I mean, you can definitely see some good ones because I've done that without even knowing what I was looking at until I looked up resources online to try and see what I was looking at. But that one in Cygnus, that was like a wow moment for me. So additional resources, like I already mentioned, there are several observing programs with the Astro League. If you want to try and complete one of them, even if you don't want to complete one of them or several of them, you can still like get some good examples of what some of the easier to see targets might be. And one of the I'm actually working on 3 different ones right now. I'm working on Universe Sampler, the Lunar Observation Program, which Ralph just recently completed. Good job. I will say that one can be a little frustrating, at least for me, because I don't know if everyone's familiar with the Lunar Observation Program, but some of the observations you have to do at certain phases of the moon. So it's like, look at this crater on a 4-day-old moon, or look at this crater on a 7-day-old moon. And I'm like, all right, I plan it a couple days in advance. I'm like, all right, I'm going to go out on Thursday night and I'm going to see this crater when it's 4 days old. And it's like, well, it's cloudy that night, so I got to wait 30 more days. Or I'm like, all right, we're going to go out tonight. And I'm like, wait a second, the moon's not going to rise. Like it's going to be below the horizon. So got to wait another 30 days. But as Ralph can probably tell you, persistence will pay off if that's something you want to take to completion. So I am working on that one. The Universe Sampler Program, I would like to pass this one around. This is a booklet that you can purchase from the Astro League store. And it's designed more towards like beginners, which I'm certainly a beginner. I'll forever be a beginner, but that's okay. I'll wear that badge with honor. But so in order to see what all they have in that program as far as completing it to get your pin, you actually have to buy the booklet, which is okay. I mean, it's not super expensive. Like I was completely fine with that. And that one kind of gives you, as the name would imply, a sampler. So it has you look at planets, it has you look at a comet. You don't have to look at 10 of them, you just have to look at one of them. So I've already done that one. That's what that observation log page was for. That was for the Universe Sampler Program. But it's going to have you look at different deep sky objects. And another thing it did too that I actually liked that I didn't really know about myself personally until I read that booklet was estimating your altitude and your azimuth, without any type of instrumentation. So if you think about it, like, okay, you're looking at the sky. It's like you're standing up on the Earth, and kind of by your perspective, it's like half a hemisphere, right? Or half a sphere. So you've got like 360-degree circles. So I think of it kind of like pieces of a pie. I'm like, okay, if I'm right here, and it's like, okay, I know that's the North Star. If I go completely behind me, it's like, okay, that's 180 degrees. And if I kind of like go in here, and I think it had a pair of stars that had you estimate the altitude and azimuth of. I was like, okay, I can do that. That doesn't sound too bad. So it's like, if I can do it, anyone can do it. So I would recommend that book if anyone wants to dive into that program. But I've also got my lunar observation log here too. I'm maybe a third of the way through it. There's 100 different observations on this one. That's one thing that the larger binoculars are great for, because some of the craters they have you look at for the lunar program, they're pretty small to see at 10 times magnification. And even at 20 times, I'm like, are you sure about that? Like, I'm looking at the map and I'm like, I know my eyesight's not what it used to be, but like, okay, like I think it's right there. So some of those can be a little difficult. You kind of have to train your eye to know what you're looking at. But I bought a lunar map from Sky and Telescope. That's a really good one. It's got pretty much everything that's been named. It's on that list, and you can find everything from the lunar observation program on that list. So that can help you out a lot when you're looking at that. That's another thing too that I like about having the binoculars is, okay, so the image is erect. So when they show you the picture on the map itself, it's an erect image. It's not like a telescope shot. Like they've done that through like a camera, I guess. But so that helps me. I'm not like, oh, wait a second, that's backwards and upside down. So for me personally, it helps me out a lot to use the binoculars on that one.
How do you hold your binoculars steady?
Another good question. So I happen to have an Orion Paragon Plus mount. I don't know if you can see that online, but so this one's made by Orion, and what I like about this one is it's the parallelogram, so it has adjustable legs on it, and it's got a leveler on it too. So even if you're my height, or if you're a foot shorter than me or a foot taller than I am, you can still utilize this with relative ease. So these are going to mount up here just like this. And one thing I do like about the SkyMaster Pros that I didn't really get with the Zoom L pair that I have, this bracketing mount is much, much better than the one on the Zoom L pair. So it can be pretty stable once you put these on. And the good thing about the parallelogram mount like this, and I think Richard has one just like this because I think he's the one who recommended it to me. So you can change the height on these without changing the altitude. That's what I like about these. So you can raise this up and down, and your altitude is going to stay the same for your binoculars, which is great if you're, doing some sort of outreach, or if you got a family out and you're looking at something with your binoculars and you've got people of different height. You can just kind of go up and down without losing what's in the field of view there. And with your binoculars, they're not really going to move out of the field of view as fast as a telescope because you're looking at a much larger field of view than a telescope. A telescope is probably going to be less than a degree, I would think, field of view. And even with the bigger ones here, you've got 3.2 degrees. So you've got a lot to work with, and you can raise it up and down if you want to have someone else that you want to allow look at whatever it is here in the sky. So good question. Thanks for asking that. I'd kind of forgotten about that. These smaller ones, you don't really need a mount for unless you just want to. So I don't know what the weight of these are, but those weigh about 2.5 kilos, so about 5 or so pounds. So they're pretty heavy. So you take those and you hold them up like that, 20 seconds you're going to start going like that. So really you need a mount once you get to ones about that size. And mounts come in all kinds of different, price levels. So that one runs about $300, I think. They certainly make some that are more expensive than that, and they make some that are less expensive. So I would say that's a pretty good intermediate to maybe a little bit higher end one. Like, it's not go-to or anything like that, but it'll definitely hold ones of that size steady for anything you need to look at. So before I head to the Q&A part, I know we've already had some questions. That's good. I would much rather this be a discussion than me just go up here and lecture on and on forever and ever. It helps me out to have people ask questions because maybe you all have thought of something that I haven't thought of. So that's good to have questions. But I wanted to kind of go into why I choose the binocular route for most of my outings. I do have a telescope, as I mentioned earlier, and definitely not opposed to telescopes. I might even buy another one before too long. But if time is a luxury, Like if you need to get out the door in a hurry, it's a lot easier to load the car up when you've got a pair of binoculars than if you got several parts of a telescope that you need to put in the car. So I do like the fact that I can just get in and go, or I can just go out in my backyard if, you know, if it happens to be clear for that one day a month that we've been getting here lately. So I do like the fact that I haven't had to spend a whole lot of money on these. I know I have more than one pair, but definitely cheaper than like a go-to telescope. So I'm okay with that. And I definitely wouldn't say that I would ever lose interest in astronomy. Like, I definitely want to learn more than what I know currently. I want to keep learning. But I think the binoculars really helped me avoid a phrase that you might use for cheaper telescopes, like a hobby killer. I wanted to avoid that. So I'm like, okay, like if I'm using binoculars, I don't think I'm going to run into like a hobby killer situation. So if I can just kind of ease myself into the hobby and find a few objects I like, maybe a certain type of object that I like viewing the best, I can kind of go into that and kind of focus on that. So I think it's really helped me enjoy the hobby more by not getting burned out on trying to do too much at once. So maybe you're limited somewhat in some of the things you can see. Like you can see quite a few deep sky objects, but I mean you can't see as many as you can with, you know, a 12-inch telescope. But I do like the fact that with binoculars you can kind of ease into it, kind of get a feel for, you know, how you want to go about the hobby. So any other questions? Any other discussions? What you got?
So when you're looking at a pair of binoculars, those the 5x7. So if you say you got like 10 by 50s or 7 by 50s, which ones are the brighter ones? The 10 by 50s or the 7 by 50s? And is it the number in the back or the number in the front that determines that?
The what's going to, if the objective lens diameter is the same size, the brighter one is going to be the one with the lower magnification.
Okay.
Because
So,
like the more magnification you have, the dimmer your image is going to be.
gotcha. Same with telescope.
Mm-hmm.
And from an old farts perspective of this, been in this a long time. When I first started, 750s were very popular, easy to get a hold of, and they were the go-to binoculars. You can hardly find 750s now. Everything's gone to 1050s. As you get older, the higher power at 10 is very difficult to hold. The 20s, you might as well, if you buy a pair of 20s, you might as well say, I've got to have a mount, because you will not be able to hold those and be able to see anything. Even on the lunar program, they specifically tell you in the directions that you probably need a mount to be able to see these, because you're going to have to go, you're going to have to look through binoculars and refer back to the star chart. And if you're trying to do this and then look at the star chart and then go back to where you were, forget it, because you're not going to be able to. The good thing about getting a parallel mount, yes, that's a lot of money, but there are other ways to build one, which I've got a few things that I'm working on now that I'm trying to design one that is less than $100 that you can put a small pair of binoculars on if you have a 3D printer and just a little, you know, hands-on capability you can build with no problem. But binocular astronomy is much easier if you can put those binoculars on a mount and aim it at the sky and where you think the object is and look at the star chart and go back to them and it's there. Yes, the field has drifted a little bit, but you have enough time, because like Nick said, the field of view is wide enough, especially on the icons, that the field of view is wide enough that you have enough time to reference your star chart and still get back to the binoculars and they haven't drifted out of field of view yet.
And
Ton of stuff that you can see in a pair of binoculars.
oh yeah, and depending on what type of binocular pair you buy, some of them are going to have different little accessories that you can take advantage of. I personally have never used a red dot finder scope. I prefer the handheld green laser. But the SkyMaster Pros, you can actually remove this and install a red dot finder scope, which is pretty convenient if you're going to have it mounted and you want to try and find something without having to look through the eyepiece every time.
What's been your favorite thing you've observed through your binoculars?
Probably the comet, just because it was so difficult for me to find it the first time. When I finally did find it, I was like, all right, now I got to take a picture of it. And hours later of me trying to fool with the iPhone mount, I was like, all right, I finally got it. Click, dang it, it's blurry. Click, yay, I finally got one.
I remember that night you looked for it for like hours up at cloud.
Oh yeah, I lost a lot of sleep over that, but it was worth it. It was definitely worth it.
So, do all binoculars, is that little attachment point that hooks it on, does that come with the binoculars?
They came with this particular pair because I guess Celestron pretty much assumes if you're going to buy a pair this large that you're going to mount them, that no one's going to try and hold them up in the sky.
What about the others?
These do not. I'm sure you could probably get some sort of adapter to mount these.
Nick, on the end,
Yeah.
where it pivots,
The
on this
Nikon button
end
comes
toward
on.
the,
Oh, does it? Okay.
there's a cover
On the
on
other
the
side.
other end.
Oh, the other end.
Where the Nikon button is.
Okay.
You pull off where it says Nikon.
There, that screws off, and there's a 1/4 20 thread in
Yep.
there, and they sell everybody. There's all kinds of different binoculars.
See, I told you I was a beginner. I already learned something new here. Great.
So Nikon has one for that.
Now I'm going to have to get a bracket for these.
They're all
Don't buy a
different
what?
sizes.
Plastic.
Oh, no, for
Make it's
sure.
metal.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Make sure it's metal.
Yeah, good point. Thanks for bringing that up.
It's a 7 by 50.
So yeah, these come with it because they're
They're my favorite.
like, if you're going to buy these, you're definitely going to mount it. So they at least had enough courtesy to give you the bracket stock with it.
And
What-
the good
what
thing
is
about those, you can move that bracket along that rail
Hmm.
and find the CG, the balance point of the binoculars.
Right, which is what I'm going to have to do if I ever want to try and mount the phone on it.
Yeah. So that's one advantage that you can move it and balance those. The one thing I have an older pair of those, and I have a project I'm working on right now. When I finally got the project finished, I looked at the tower up next to Matt's house, and I've got double vision, so they are not collimated. I have never noticed them, and I've had them for a number of years. But I'm all of a sudden like, there's 3 towers there. Why is there 3 towers? There's not 3 towers, there's only 2. And I started looking in the main tower, and I'm getting 2 visions of the main tower about that far apart. So I got online when I went in, because I was about ready to throw them in the garbage. Got online and Googled that, and apparently it's a very common problem, because there's a number of places on there that tell you, okay, if you're looking for the collimation screws, all you do is pull the rubber back right here, and the collimation screw is there, and you feel the rubber back here, and the collimation screw is there, and this is how you collimate it with a little small screwdriver. So that's one of the projects, hopefully this weekend, to recollimate those binoculars.
I guess that's probably another risk that you run too by having them shipped. Maybe they can lose collimation, like if they're vibrating around during ship.
Smaller binoculars, though, they're really good, but apparently a number of people complained about those Celestron.
Oh yeah, I was reading reviews online because I was trying to decide, do I want the SkyMaster Pros or just the SkyMaster? And I was trying, well, first off, I was trying to find out what the difference was. And the best I could come up with was, I think it's the coating, the optical coatings are different in the Pros than they are in the regular version. And I think the mount is a little bit more robust on these.
They're a lot sturdier than mine. I mean, you can look at those and mine, that's why I was looking at yours a while ago.
Mhm.
Mine's nowhere near, doesn't have the amount of bloom that has on it.
But I've been pleased with those. I really like them.
So if it's not that style though, I have one pair they're in line, there's no offset prism type.
Mm-hmm.
They're
Doesn't matter.
10 power 40s off, they don't have a thing on them.
Yeah.
Is there any way to
It's
mount
just
that?
there's a pentaprism and
Roof
It's
prism.
an inline.
what's the other one?
The
Roof prism.
Yeah, roof prism. These are poro prisms.
It's just the way the prisms are on the inside to erect the image.
So if you want to get out this weekend, but and you have a pair of binoculars, you can make yourself, it's not as good as this mount because it won't stay pointed at the sky, but you can stabilize them by putting a couple of 2x2s and screwing a 2x6 at one end and a 2x4 at the other end. And then partway back, you put a 2x4 vertically in there, and you strap your binoculars to that, and then you set it on your shoulders. And the long tail sticks out the back, and it balances.
Interesting.
Binoculars, you have to kind of play with how long it should be.
You can make that out of PVC pipe also.
At a BBC.
They're,
Yeah.
you can go on Sky Telescope and you can look, and I forget where it is on their site, but it actually shows